My neighbor knocked on my door at 3 a.m. with a terrifying warning. "Don't claim your lottery prize yet." I had just won $812 million, but what I discovered at dawn was that, well, before I tell you, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the incredible stories we share here. Have you subscribed yet? Now, let me tell you how a simple lottery ticket almost cost me my life. The violent pounding on my front door ripped me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in months, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. 3:17 in the morning, the glowing red numbers on my bedside clock seemed to mock me as I stumbled through the darkness of my modest Cleveland home, my arthritic knees protesting every step. 28 years of marriage, 3 brutal years of divorce proceedings, and countless sleepless nights had taught me that unexpected visitors at this hour meant only one thing: trouble of the worst kind. The kind that left you broken, desperate, and questioning every decision you'd ever made. My ex-husband Marcus had favorite times for his drunken rampages and threatening phone calls. But this felt different. Urgent, yet controlled. Desperate, yet somehow calculated. As I approached the front window, my breath fogging the cold glass, I saw the familiar silhouette of Earl Thompson standing on my porch in his house slippers and flannel pajamas, his silver hair wild from sleep, but his posture rigid with tension. Earl had been my neighbor for 15 years, a quiet man who'd worked in corporate security before retirement, someone who helped with my groceries when my hands were too swollen to carry them, and who'd listened patiently to my tears over the back fence during the worst days of my divorce. But Earl had never, not once in all those years, appeared at my door in the middle of the night with fear written across his weathered features like a neon sign warning of impending disaster. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers trembling, not from the October cold seeping through the doorframe, but from a growing sense that whatever had driven Earl from his warm bed at this ungodly hour was about to shatter what little peace I'd managed to cobble together in my 52 years of existence. The autumn wind whipped through the gap as I cracked open the door, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and something else I couldn't quite identify. The metallic taste of fear that seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a distant fire. "Linda," Earl whispered, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach drop like a stone thrown into deep water. His eyes darted nervously over his shoulder toward the street where shadows seemed to move with purpose, rather than dancing randomly in the streetlight. "Linda, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to trust me completely." The intensity in his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from my gentle neighbor, the man who brought me soup when I was sick, and who'd helped me change a flat tire in the rain just last month. Something was terrifyingly wrong, and somehow, God help me, I was at the center of it. The lottery ticket I'd checked just hours earlier, the one that had made me a winner of $812 million, suddenly felt like it was burning a hole in my purse, which sat on the kitchen counter barely 20 feet away. I'd barely processed the reality of those matching numbers, barely allowed myself to believe that after 52 years of struggling, of working double shifts at Henderson's Diner until my feet bled, of watching my marriage crumble under the weight of financial stress and broken dreams, I had finally caught a break that could change everything. "Earl, what's wrong?" I asked, stepping back to let him into my living room, noticing how he moved with the fluid grace of someone much younger, someone who'd learned to navigate dangerous situations with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of experiences far beyond the corporate security work he'd mentioned over casual conversations. He passed me with an urgency that made my chest tighten with anxiety, his eyes scanning my modest living room as if he expected armed men to emerge from behind my second-hand furniture at any moment. The way he positioned himself near the window, angled so he could see both the front door and the street outside, reminded me of something from a movie, except this was my life, my living room, my growing terror that whatever I'd stumbled into was far worse than anything I'd ever imagined. "I bet he's fine," he said quickly, reading the concern on my face about his wife. But his tone suggested that everything else was decidedly not fine. "This isn't about her, Linda. This is about you. About what you won tonight." The words hit me like ice water injected directly into my veins. and I had to grab the back of my couch to keep from collapsing as the implications crashed over me in waves. How could he possibly know about the ticket? I'd only checked the numbers a few hours ago, alone in my kitchen with my reading glasses and my coffee growing cold, cross-referencing each number 3 times with the official website to make sure I wasn't dreaming or hallucinating from exhaustion. I hadn't told a soul, not my sister Nancy in Florida, not my co-workers at the diner, not even my daughter Emily who lived in Michigan and was struggling through her own divorce. The winning ticket was tucked safely in my wallet, hidden like a secret that could either save my life or destroy it completely. And I don't know what you're talking about, I lied. But my voice betrayed me with its unsteadiness, cracking like thin ice under the weight of a truth I wasn't ready to acknowledge or confront. Earl shook his head with the sad resignation of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood turn to liquid nitrogen in my veins. Genuine, bone-deep fear, mixed with the kind of professional assessment that suggested he knew exactly how much danger I was in. "Linda, please," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I know you won the Mega Millions tonight, $812 million. And I know that if you try to claim that prize tomorrow, hell, if you try to claim it any time in the next few days without taking proper precautions, you're going to end up dead." The word dead hung in the air between us like a physical presence, and I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of the world, as if the floor beneath my feet had suddenly revealed itself to be nothing more than a thin veneer over an abyss of danger I'd never suspected existed. This was supposed to be the moment my life finally turned around. The moment I could pay off the crushing medical bills from my mother's cancer treatment. The moment I could help Emily escape her abusive marriage. The moment I could finally breathe without worrying about whether I could afford groceries and rent in the same month. Instead, I was being told that my good fortune was actually a death sentence, delivered by a neighbor I'd trusted for 15 years, but who was clearly someone entirely different from the man I thought I knew. "You're scaring me, Earl," I whispered, though the words felt inadequate to capture the terror that was spreading through my chest like poison, making it difficult to breathe or think clearly about anything beyond the growing certainty that my life had just taken a turn toward something dark and deadly. "Good," he said firmly, his expression shifting into something harder and more serious than I'd ever seen from the gentle retiree who fed stray cats and always remembered my birthday. "You should be scared, Linda, because the people who know about your ticket aren't the kind of people who play fair. And they're not the kind of people who leave witnesses behind to tell stories." He moved closer, and I caught a glimpse of something in his posture that spoke of training and experience in situations that had nothing to do with corporate boardrooms or neighborhood watch meetings. "I've been watching over this neighborhood for longer than you know," he continued, his voice taking on an edge of authority that made me realize I'd never really known Earl Thompson at all. "I've seen things, heard things, documented patterns of behavior that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. And tonight, Linda, I heard your name mentioned in a conversation that made my blood run cold and convinced me that time was running out faster than I'd hoped. The revelation that people were already talking about me, already planning something involving my ticket, made me feel like prey being stalked by predators I couldn't see, but who could apparently see me with perfect clarity. The room seemed to tilt around me, as Earl's words penetrated the shock that had settled over my mind like a heavy blanket, and I found myself struggling to process the idea that winning the lottery, the thing I'd dreamed about for years, had somehow made me a target for people who apparently had no qualms about killing to get what they wanted. "Who's talking about me?" I demanded, my voice stronger now as anger began to compete with fear in my chest, fueled by a growing sense of betrayal and violation that someone had been watching me, planning for me, without my knowledge or consent. "And how do they know about the ticket when I haven't told anyone?" Earl's eyes darted toward the window again, and I realized he was watching for something, or someone, which meant the danger he was warning me about wasn't hypothetical or distant, but immediate and possibly closing in on us even as we spoke. "That's exactly what I'm trying to warn you about," he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much of the world's darkness to maintain any illusions about human nature. "There are people connected to Murphy's Corner store, People with resources and connections you don't want to mess with, who've been tracking big lottery winners for years. They have systems, Linda. Systems for identifying winners, for researching their backgrounds, for determining the best approach to separate them from their money. He paused, studying my face as if trying to gauge whether I could handle what he was about to tell me next. And they have systems for making sure those winners never get to enjoy their good fortune if they prove to be uncooperative. The mention of Murphy's Corner Store hit me like a physical blow, because that was exactly where I'd been buying my weekly tickets for the past 5 years. The same place where I'd purchased the winning ticket just yesterday evening during my usual stop after my shift at the diner. Old Man Murphy had run that store with integrity for decades, becoming a cornerstone of our neighborhood, someone I'd trusted implicitly and who'd always treated me with kindness and respect. But now Earl was telling me that this place I'd considered safe, routine, almost comforting in its familiarity, was actually the center of something sinister that had been watching me for who knows how long. Jake Murphy has been asking questions about you for months, Earl continued, referencing Old Man Murphy's grandson, who'd taken over much of the daily operations of the store. Questions about your family, whether you live alone, what your work schedule is like, how you handle money. What you probably dismissed as friendly small talk was actually intelligence gathering, Linda. They've been building a profile on you, waiting for the day you might become worth their attention. The violation of it, the systematic invasion of my privacy by people I'd trusted, made me feel sick in a way that went beyond physical nausea. It was the sickness of realizing that nothing in my life was as safe or simple as I'd believed it to be. Every casual conversation with Jake, every friendly inquiry about my day or my family, had been part of a larger plan to exploit any weakness they might eventually need to target. What am I supposed to do? I asked, hating how small and helpless my voice sounded, like a child asking an adult to make the monsters under the bed go away. Except the monsters were real, and they were coming for me with all the patience and planning of professional predators. Earl reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper with a phone number written in his careful handwriting, pressing it into my trembling hand with the solemnity of someone passing along a sacred trust. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp, you're going to call this number," he said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion, but a lifeline being thrown to a drowning woman. "You're going to tell whoever answers that Earl Thompson sent you, and you're going to ask for immediate protection detail. Don't ask me how I know about this number, and don't ask me why I'm in a position to help you this way. Just trust me when I say that the person who answers this phone has been waiting for a call like this, and they have the resources and authority to keep you alive long enough to figure out how to claim your prize safely." I stared at the paper in my hand, my mind reeling with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered about who my neighbor really was and what kind of life he'd lived before becoming the quiet retiree I thought I knew. The phone number looked ordinary enough, 10 digits that could belong to anyone. But something about the way Earl had given it to me suggested it was anything but ordinary. It was a key to a world I'd never known existed, a world where people like me became targets simply for being lucky enough to win money we'd never dreamed of having. As Earl prepared to leave, moving toward my front door with the same careful urgency that had brought him here, I caught his arm with fingers that shook despite my efforts to appear calm and in control. "Earl," I said, my voice barely above a whisper because speaking too loudly felt dangerous now, as if raising my voice might attract the attention of the people he was warning me about. "Who are you, really? How do you know all this?" He paused with his hand on the doorknob, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his weathered features, a depth of experience and knowledge that suggested his 15 years as my neighbor had been just one chapter in a much longer and more complicated story. Let's just say that corporate security covered a lot more ground than most people realize," he said carefully, "and the skills I learned in that work have served me well in keeping this neighborhood safer than anyone knows." It wasn't really an answer, but it was clearly all the answer I was going to get, at least for now. He opened the door and stepped back into the cold night air, turning back to look at me one final time with an expression that was equal parts protective and deeply sad. "Call that number at 8 o'clock, Linda. Tell them everything I've told you tonight. And whatever you do, don't tell anyone else about that ticket. Not your family, not your friends, not even the police until you've talked to the person who answers that phone." He paused, studying my face as if memorizing it. "And Linda? If anything feels wrong before then, if you see anyone watching your house or following you, if Jake Murphy or anyone else tries to contact you before you make that call, you run. You don't pack, you don't call anyone, you just run and keep running until you reach a police station." With that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing in my doorway with a lottery ticket worth $812 million and the terrible knowledge that it might be the most dangerous thing I'd ever possessed. Sleep never returned after Earl's visit, and as pale October sunlight began filtering through my kitchen blinds, I sat at the same Formica table where I'd checked those life-changing numbers just 8 hours earlier. The lottery ticket now spread before me like evidence in a crime I didn't understand, but was somehow central to. My coffee had grown cold hours ago, but I kept wrapping my hands around the mug anyway, desperate for any source of warmth in a world that had suddenly become hostile and threatening in ways I'd never imagined possible. The 6 numbers that had seemed like a blessing from heaven, 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and Megaball 18, now looked like coordinates on a map leading directly to my own destruction, each digit a step closer to a danger I was only beginning to comprehend. I'd spent the dark hours replaying every interaction I'd had at Murphy's Corner store over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that might have warned me that I was being watched and evaluated like livestock at an auction. Jake Murphy's friendly questions about my family, his casual inquiries about my work schedule, his seemingly innocent comments about what I'd do if I ever won big. All of it took on a sinister new meaning in the cold light of dawn and the growing certainty that I'd been targeted long before I'd won anything worth stealing. The realization that my weekly routine, my predictable stops at the store, my trusting nature had all been weaponized against me, made me feel violated in a way that went deeper than any physical assault could have reached. At exactly 8 o'clock, I dialed the number Earl had given me, my fingers steadier than I'd expected them to be despite the terror that had been building in my chest since his warning. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered with a simple, "Morrison." No greeting, no company identification, just a surname that carried an air of authority and competence that somehow managed to be both reassuring and intimidating. "Earl Thompson sent me," I said, my voice barely steady but determined to follow his instructions exactly as he'd given them. "I think I need help." There was a brief pause during which I could hear the soft clicking of computer keys in the background, and when Morrison spoke again, his voice carried a weight of knowledge that made my heart race with a mixture of hope and new fears. "Ms. Linda Hartwell, 1247 Maple Street," he said, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins because I hadn't given him my name or address, information he shouldn't have possessed unless Earl's warning was even more serious than I'd realized. "You purchased lottery tickets at Murphy's Corner store yesterday at 9:15 p.m. using your usual numbers. You matched all 6 numbers on the Mega Millions drawing. Current jackpot value, $812 million. The casual recitation of facts that should have been impossible for him to know made my hands start shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Because it meant that not only was Earl's story true, but the people Morrison represented had been watching me closely enough to know details about my life that I'd thought were private and safe. "Who are you?" I whispered. Though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer because the implications of what he'd already revealed were staggering enough to make me question everything I'd believed about the safety and predictability of my small life in Cleveland. "Someone who's been monitoring Murphy's Corner store as part of a federal investigation," Morrison replied, his tone professional but not unkind, like a doctor delivering serious news with competent bedside manner. "And someone who's been hoping we'd never have to make contact with a winner this high-profile, because it means the stakes just became life or death for everyone involved." The word federal hit me like a physical blow, because it meant this wasn't just about local criminals or even organized crime. This was something big enough to attract the attention of federal law enforcement, something serious enough to justify the kind of surveillance operation that apparently knew my every move. "Ms. Hartwell, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Morrison continued, and something in his tone made me sit up straighter and focus all my attention on his words. Murphy's Corner Store has been under federal surveillance for 2 years as part of an investigation into a network that spans 12 states and has been responsible for the deaths of at least 4 lottery winners whose only crime was trusting the wrong people with information about their winnings. The number hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. 4 people had died because they'd won money at stores connected to this network. 4 innocent people who'd done nothing more than buy a ticket and get lucky, just like me. The deaths look accidental at first glance, Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty to maintain any illusions about what people were capable of doing for money. Heart attacks caused by untraceable drugs, car accidents with cut brake lines, apparent robberies gone wrong that conveniently happened after the victims had agreed to meet with helpful store employees who promised to assist them in claiming their prizes safely. Each method of murder he described made me feel sicker, not just because of the cruelty involved, but because of the calculated nature of it. These weren't crimes of passion or desperation, but carefully planned executions designed to look like anything except what they really were. Margaret Chen in Portland won $47 million and died of an apparent heart attack 3 days after claiming her prize. Robert Valdez in Phoenix, $73 million, killed when his car went off a mountain road due to brake failure. Claire Williams in Nashville, $215 million, last seen entering a building with people who claimed they were going to help her set up secure financial accounts. Morrison's voice took on an edge of barely controlled anger as he recited the names and details. And Thomas Brennan, right here in Cleveland, $4 million, found in the Cuyahoga River after meeting with Jake Murphy and his associates to discuss prize security measures. The mention of a local victim, someone who'd lived just blocks away from me and had probably walked the same streets and shopped at the same stores, made the danger feel immediate and personal in a way that the out-of-state deaths hadn't quite managed to achieve. Thomas Brennan lived on Oak Street, Morrison continued, and I realized with growing horror that I knew that name, Tom Brennan, the elderly widower who used to come into Henderson's diner every Tuesday for coffee and pie, who always left exact change and never caused any trouble for anyone. He was a regular customer at Murphy's store for years, just like you, Alinda. He trusted Jake Murphy because Jake had been nothing but friendly and helpful for as long as Tom could remember. When Jake offered to help him claim his prize safely, Tom thought he was getting assistance from a neighbor, not walking into a trap set by people who'd been planning his death from the moment his numbers came up. The personal connection, the fact that I'd served coffee to a man who'd been murdered by the same people who were now targeting me, made this whole nightmare feel real in a way that abstract warnings and statistics couldn't. Tom Brennan had been a kind man, someone who'd always asked about my family, and who'd left bigger tips during the weeks when he knew I was struggling with medical bills. He'd deserved to enjoy his winnings, to spoil his grandchildren and maybe take the cruise his late wife had always wanted to go on. Instead, he'd died because he'd trusted the wrong people, and now those same people were setting their sights on me. How do you know all this? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer would reveal more about Earl Thompson than I was ready to handle, because Earl Thompson isn't just your neighbor, Ms. Hartwell, Morrison said, confirming my growing suspicions. He's a retired CIA operative who worked in corporate security after leaving the agency, and we recruited him 2 years ago to monitor Murphy's store when we first identified it as part of this network. The revelation about Earl hit me harder than everything else combined, because it meant the man I'd known for 15 years, who'd helped me carry groceries and fixed my mailbox and listened to me cry about my divorce, had been living a carefully constructed lie designed to protect me from dangers I'd never suspected existed. Earl has been feeding us intelligence for 2 years, Morrison continued, but we've never had a winner this large, and we've never had advance warning about a potential target. You represent our best chance to expose the entire network, Alinda, but only if you're willing to work with us to bring them into the open. The choice he was presenting wasn't really a choice at all. Cooperate with federal agents and risk my life as bait in a trap, or refuse to help and become another victim like Tom Brennan and the others who'd trusted the wrong people. What does working with you mean? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would fundamentally change my life forever. whether I survived this or not. Morrison's explanation was both more and less reassuring than I'd hoped it would be. "We're going to move you to a safe location while we finalize the operational details," he said. "You'll have round-the-clock protection, and when this is over, you'll be able to claim your winnings without fear. But Linda, you need to understand, once we move forward with this operation, your life as you know it will be over. Even after we arrest everyone involved, you'll need to relocate permanently. Your safety will depend on starting fresh somewhere else with a new identity and no connections to your old life." The magnitude of what he was telling me pressed down like a physical weight, making it difficult to breathe as I realized that the lottery ticket wasn't just threatening my life. It was threatening everything I'd ever known or cared about. "What about my family?" I asked, my voice cracking as I thought about Emily struggling through her divorce in Michigan. About my sister Nancy, who called me every Sunday from Florida. About the few friends I'd managed to maintain through the chaos of my own divorce and financial struggles. Morrison's pause before answering told me more than his words would. "We're coordinating with local authorities to provide discreet protection for your immediate family members," he said carefully. "But Linda, you need to understand that your daughter and sister are also potential targets now. These people don't hesitate to use family members as leverage, and they've already demonstrated they'll kill innocent people to protect their operation." The idea that Emily might be in danger because of my good fortune made me feel sick with guilt and terror, because she was already vulnerable from her own marital problems and didn't deserve to have her life threatened because her mother had won money at the wrong store. "Are you telling me that everyone I care about is now in danger because I bought a lottery ticket?" I asked. And the anguish in my voice seemed to affect Morrison in a way his professional composure couldn't quite hide. "I'm telling you that these people have killed 4 innocent people already, and they're not going to stop with you if they think your family might cause problems for them," he said quietly. "But I'm also telling you that we have the resources and experience to protect everyone you care about, if you'll trust us enough to let us do our jobs." Trust. Such a simple word that had become impossibly complicated in the space of 12 hours, as I sat in my kitchen trying to decide whether to trust federal agents I'd never met to protect my life and the lives of everyone I loved. The decision crystallized in my mind not as a choice between safety and danger, but as a choice between being a victim and being someone who fought back against the people who'd murdered Tom Brennan and the others whose only crime had been getting lucky. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected it to be. "I'll work with you. But I want to know every detail of the plan, every risk involved, and I want guarantees about my family's safety." Morrison's relief was audible even through the phone, and I realized that my cooperation meant more to this investigation than just catching one group of criminals. It meant the possibility of dismantling a network that had been killing innocent people across 12 states for who knows how long. "A car will be at your house in 30 minutes, he said. "Pack only essential items, medication, important documents, 1 change of clothes. Leave everything else exactly as it is, because we need the house to look normal when Jake Murphy comes looking for you. Normal. As if anything about my life would ever be normal again." "And Earl?" I asked, because despite learning that he'd been lying to me for 2 years, he was still the person who'd risked his own safety to warn me about the danger I was in. "Earl will maintain his cover until we're ready to move," Morrison said. "His safety depends on Jake Murphy believing he's still just your concerned neighbor." As I hung up the phone and went to pack my life into a single bag, I kept looking out the window toward Murphy's corner store, visible at the end of our street like a normal neighborhood business that had been part of the community for decades. But now I knew it was something else entirely, the center of a web that had already claimed 4 lives and was reaching out to claim mine, unless I was brave enough and smart enough to help the people who wanted to tear that web apart once and for all. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in Lakewood, 43 miles outside Cleveland, nestled in one of those middle-class neighborhoods where people minded their own business, and children rode bicycles in neat driveways while their parents worried about mortgage payments and college funds, rather than federal investigations and murder conspiracies. Agent Morrison turned out to be a tall, lean man in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of a room within seconds of entering it. A man who'd clearly seen enough of the world's darkness to approach everything with professional caution, but who still retained enough humanity to offer me coffee and ask about my comfort level before diving into the devastating details of what I'd unknowingly walked into. The kitchen where we sat could have belonged to any American family, complete with a magnetic photo of a golden retriever on the refrigerator and a coffee mug proclaiming, "World's Best Dad." But the sophisticated surveillance equipment visible through the living room doorway reminded me that this wasn't someone's home. It was a fortress designed to keep dangerous people away from witnesses whose testimony could destroy entire criminal networks. "I know this is overwhelming," Morrison said, settling across from me at a kitchen table that looked like it came from a suburban furniture store but was probably bulletproof. "But I need you to understand that what you've stumbled into goes far deeper than Jake Murphy and his local operation." He spread several surveillance photographs across the table between us, and I found myself looking at images of people I recognized from Murphy's store. Men I'd assumed were regular customers, but who appeared in photo after photo, conducting what was clearly business of a much more sinister nature than buying lottery tickets and energy drinks. "These photographs were taken over the past 18 months, Morrison explained, pointing to images that showed Jake Murphy meeting with men in expensive suits outside restaurants I couldn't afford and office buildings I'd never heard of. Jake Murphy is what we call a local coordinator. He identifies and researches potential targets, but he reports to Vincent Romano in Chicago, and Romano answers to people we've been trying to reach for decades." The name Vincent Romano meant nothing to me, but something in Morrison's tone when he said it made my stomach clench with the understanding that I was now connected to someone far more dangerous than a store employee with criminal connections. "Romano runs operations in 12 states, Morrison continued, his voice taking on the grim efficiency of someone briefing a colleague rather than comforting a victim. "And he's built a network that's been systematically targeting lottery winners, insurance settlements, and inheritance recipients for over 8 years. Conservative estimates suggest they've stolen more than $400 million and killed at least 12 people who either refuse to cooperate or pose security risks to their operation." 12 people. The number hit me like ice water to the chest, because it meant Tom Brennan and the others Morrison had mentioned earlier were just the tip of an iceberg that extended far deeper into human cruelty and greed than I'd imagined possible. "Linda," Morrison said, leaning forward slightly, "I need you to understand that this isn't just about your lottery ticket anymore. You represent our first real chance to get inside Romano's network, to gather the evidence we need to dismantle an organization that's been destroying innocent lives across the country for nearly a decade." The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket, and I found myself thinking about Emily and how much she needed the financial help my winnings could provide, about the medical bills from my mother's cancer treatment that were still crushing me years after her death, about all the dreams I'd had for what this money could mean for my future. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said, though I could already guess the answer from the careful way Morrison was choosing his words. "We're going to use your disappearance to force Jake Murphy and his associates into making mistakes," he explained, pulling out a map of Cleveland and marking several locations with a red pen. "Right now, they know you won the lottery, but they don't know where you are or whether you're hiding, dead, or under protection. That uncertainty will make them desperate, and desperate people make the kind of errors that expose entire networks." The clinical way he discussed using me as bait was somehow both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it suggested he and his team knew what they were doing. Terrifying because it reminded me that I was agreeing to put myself directly in the path of people who'd already proven they had no qualms about killing to protect their interests. "The key," Morrison continued, "is to make them believe they still have a chance to get to you. To make them think you're vulnerable and accessible enough that they'll take risks they wouldn't normally consider." It sounded reasonable in the abstract, but the reality of deliberately making myself a target for people who'd murdered 12 others made my coffee taste like ash, and my hands shake despite my efforts to appear calm and ready for whatever came next. "There's something else you need to know," Morrison said, and his tone shifted to something more personal, more genuinely concerned about my well-being rather than just the success of his operation. "We've been monitoring all communications in and out of your neighborhood since Earl made contact, and Jake Murphy has made 17 phone calls since yesterday morning, 6 to local associates, 3 to Romano's people in Chicago, and 8 to numbers we haven't been able to trace yet, but which appear to be connected to enforcement specialists. The term enforcement specialists carried implications that made my stomach turn, because it suggested that Romano's organization was large and professional enough to have people whose entire job was handling the kind of problems represented by uncooperative lottery winners. "What does that mean for me?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be more frightening than any nightmare I'd ever experienced. "It means they're treating your situation as a high-priority problem that requires immediate resolution," Morrison said carefully. "Vincent Romano is flying to Cleveland this afternoon, which means your case has attracted the personal attention of someone who doesn't usually get directly involved in local operations." The fact that my lottery win had drawn a crime boss to Cleveland specifically to deal with me was both terrifying and oddly validating. I wasn't just being paranoid or dramatic. I was genuinely in danger from people who operated at a level I couldn't have imagined. When I was serving coffee and scrambled eggs at Henderson's Diner and dreaming about what I'd do if I ever won enough money to pay off my debts and help my daughter, Morrison spent the next hour briefing me on every aspect of their investigation, showing me surveillance footage of Romano's associates conducting what appeared to be normal business meetings, but which were actually planning sessions for approaching lottery winners and other potential targets. "The sophistication of their operation is what makes them so dangerous," he explained, pointing to images of men in business suits who looked like they could have been insurance agents or financial advisors rather than criminals involved in systematic murder. "Third, they don't approach victims as obvious threats. They present themselves as helpful professionals who specialize in protecting lottery winners from scams and ensuring their prizes are claimed safely. By the time victims realize they're dealing with criminals rather than legitimate consultants, they're already isolated and completely under their control. The psychological manipulation aspect of their crimes was almost worse than the violence, because it meant they were preying on the very human tendency to trust people who appeared helpful and professional during moments of vulnerability and uncertainty." Claire Williams, the kindergarten teacher from Nashville, agreed to meet with Romano's people because they convinced her that lottery offices weren't secure and that she needed professional assistance to claim her prize without attracting dangerous attention. Morrison continued, showing me a photograph of a woman whose kind eyes and patient smile reminded me of Emily when she was younger. She thought she was taking steps to protect herself when she was actually walking into a trap that had been carefully constructed specifically for her. The cruelty of using someone's caution and intelligence against them made me angry in a way that felt cleaner and more focused than the fear that had been dominating my emotions since Earl's midnight warning. "I want to help," I said, and the words surprised me with their firmness, because somewhere in the process of learning about Claire Williams and Tom Brennan and the others, my perspective had shifted from trying to protect myself to trying to prevent future victims from falling into the same trap. But I need to know exactly what the plan is. What could go wrong? And what happens to Emily and Nancy if something goes badly?" Morrison's expression softened slightly, and I realized he'd been waiting for me to move from victim to willing participant in their operation. "The plan is relatively straightforward," he said, spreading additional documents across the table. "We're going to make it appear that you've resurfaced, that you're scared but ready to claim your ticket, and that you're looking for help from someone you trust. Jake Murphy will jump at the opportunity to approach you, especially if he believes you're isolated and vulnerable." The word bait hung unspoken in the air between us, but I understood that's exactly what I was agreeing to become. Human bait in a federal trap designed to catch people who'd been killing innocent Americans for years. "The meeting will take place in a controlled environment with agents positioned throughout the area and multiple backup plans in place," Morrison continued. "You'll never be truly alone with them, Linda, and we'll have immediate extraction protocols ready if anything goes wrong." His reassurances were professional and detailed, but I couldn't forget that Tom Brennan had probably been given similar assurances by people he'd trusted, and he'd still ended up dead in the Cuyahoga River. "Narike, how do I know this won't end the same way it did for Tom Brennan?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in my chest despite Morrison's competent planning and obvious experience. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, His voice carried a weight of personal responsibility that made me understand this case meant more to him than just another successful operation. "Because Tom Brennan tried to handle Romano's people alone," he said quietly. "He was warned about the danger, but he believed he could outsmart them without federal assistance. He thought he was being clever and cautious when he was actually playing exactly into their hands." The distinction was important, but it didn't completely eliminate my fear about voluntarily walking into a situation where one wrong move could cost me my life. "Linda," Morrison continued, "I've been working cases like this for 16 years, and I've never lost a cooperating witness who followed our protocols exactly as outlined. That's not a guarantee. Nothing in this business comes with guarantees, but it's the best odds you're going to get against people who've already proven they'll kill anyone who stands between them and $800 million. The honesty of his admission that there were no guarantees was somehow more reassuring than false promises would have been, because it suggested he respected me enough to tell me the truth about the risks I was facing. "Well, when do we start?" I asked, and Morrison's smile was the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him since we'd met. "We start tomorrow morning," he said. "You're going to call Jake Murphy and tell him you're ready to come out of hiding, that you're scared about claiming your prize, but you need help from someone you trust." It sounded simple enough, but I knew from everything Morrison had told me that simple was exactly what made Romano's operation so dangerous. They specialized in making murder look like help, and betrayal look like protection, until it was too late for their victims to realize the difference. As the afternoon wore on, Morrison's team briefed me on communication protocols, recognition signals, and emergency procedures that would give me the best chance of surviving what was essentially an elaborate sting operation with my life as the primary stake. "The most important thing to remember," Morrison emphasized repeatedly, "is that your safety comes first. Always. If anything feels wrong, if your instincts tell you to run, you ignore everything else and get to safety. We can always find another way to catch these people, but we can't replace you if something goes wrong." The sentiment was touching, but it also reminded me that I was about to become the central piece in a deadly game where the other players had already proven they were willing to kill to win. As evening approached, and Morrison prepared to brief me on the specific details of tomorrow's contact with Jake Murphy, I found myself thinking about the ordinary life I'd been living just 24 hours earlier. Serving coffee, worrying about bills, dreaming about what I'd do if I ever won the lottery. That life seemed impossibly distant now, as if it had belonged to someone else entirely, someone who'd never heard of Vincent Romano, or enforcement specialists, or federal investigations that turned lottery winners into undercover operatives. But as frightening as this new reality was, it also felt like the first time in years that I was fighting for something that mattered more than just my own survival. I was fighting for justice for Tom Brennan and Claire Williams, and all the others whose only crime had been trusting the wrong people with their good fortune. And despite the terror that was building in my chest as I prepared to become bait in a trap designed to catch killers, I realized that for the first time since my divorce, I felt like I was doing something important enough to justify the risk. The morning of what Morrison's team called initial contact dawned gray and drizzling, typical October weather in Cleveland, that seemed to perfectly match my mood as I sat in the safe house kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink while federal agents moved around me with the quiet efficiency of people preparing for war. Morrison had been up since 4 a.m., coordinating with surveillance teams and backup units, his normally composed demeanor showing subtle signs of the stress that came with orchestrating an operation where one mistake could cost an innocent woman her life. Linda," he said, settling across from me at the kitchen table with his own untouched coffee. "I want you to know that we have 17 agents positioned throughout the city today, monitoring every move Jake Murphy and his associates make, tracking every phone call, watching every location they might use." His voice carried the weight of someone trying to provide reassurance, while acknowledging that no amount of preparation could eliminate every possible danger. "But I also want you to understand that the moment you make that phone call, there's no going back. Once Jake Murphy knows you're willing to surface, events will move quickly, and some of those events will be beyond our control." The finality in his words made my stomach clench with anxiety, but also with a strange kind of determination that surprised me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was someone who'd chosen to fight back against people who'd been destroying innocent lives for years. And that choice gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before my marriage fell apart. At exactly 11:30, I dialed Jake Murphy's number from the burner phone Morrison had given me, my hands steadier than I'd expected despite the fact that I was about to begin a conversation that could either save my life or end it, depending on how well I could perform the role of a frightened woman desperately in need of help. Jake answered on the second ring, and the relief in his voice when he heard my name was so convincing that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed he'd genuinely been worried about my welfare. "Linda, Jesus Christ, where have you been?" "I've been going crazy. You didn't come in for your usual coffee yesterday, and when I drove by your house last night, all the lights were off and it looked like nobody had been home for days." His performance was flawless. The concerned neighbor and trusted store employee who'd noticed my absence and feared something terrible had happened to me. "I've been scared, Jake," I said, letting my voice shake just enough to sound authentic while being careful not to overact in a way that might make him suspicious. "Ever since I checked those numbers and realized what I'd won, I've been terrified. I keep thinking about all those horrible stories you hear about lottery winners, about people who get robbed or killed or worse." The words came easier than I'd expected, probably because underneath the performance, I really was terrified. Not of imaginary dangers, but of the very real man I was talking to and the organization he represented. Jake's response was exactly what Morrison had predicted, delivered with just the right mixture of understanding concern and subtle authority that was designed to make me feel both validated in my fears and grateful for his guidance. "Linda, you're absolutely right to be careful," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious and protective. "There are a lot of predators out there who specifically target lottery winners, people who see someone like you as easy prey. But you know me. You know my family has been part of this community for decades. We're not those kind of people." The irony of hearing a murderer warn me about predators while positioning himself as my protector was almost overwhelming. But I forced myself to focus on the script Morrison had helped me rehearse. I don't know who to trust anymore," I said, infusing my voice with the kind of grateful desperation that would make Jake believe he was reeling in an easy target. "I mean, I trust you, Jake, because you've always been so kind to me. But this is so much money, and I don't know what to do." There was a brief pause, and I could almost hear him calculating his approach, deciding how quickly he could move me from fear to dependence to complete vulnerability. "Listen," he said finally, "why don't we meet somewhere public where you'll feel completely safe, and we can talk about your options?" I've actually helped a couple of other big winners over the years. Nothing quite as big as yours, obviously, but enough to understand the process and the pitfalls you need to avoid. The ease with which he lied about helping other winners, knowing what I now knew about the fate of those previous clients, made my stomach turn with revulsion. But I managed to sound relieved and grateful when I agreed to meet with him. Could we do it today?" I asked, following Morrison's guidance about appearing eager but not suspicious. "Somewhere with lots of people around? I know it sounds paranoid, but I feel like everyone's watching me now." Jake's reassurance came smoothly, professionally, like someone who'd had this exact conversation multiple times before with other victims who'd never lived to regret trusting him. "Not paranoid at all, Linda. How about Brookside Park? There's a nice pavilion by the lake, plenty of foot traffic, very safe and public. Would 2:00 work for you?" The fact that he suggested the exact location Morrison's team had prepared made my heart race with nervous anticipation. But I managed to sound genuinely relieved when I agreed to meet him there. As I hung up the phone, Morrison nodded approvingly from across the kitchen table. "Perfect," he said. He took the bait exactly like we predicted. Now comes the dangerous part. The dangerous part, it turned out, was the next 2.5 hours of waiting, while Morrison's team confirmed that Jake Murphy was making exactly the calls they'd expected him to make. First to his local associates, then to Vincent Romano, who had arrived in Cleveland the previous evening and was coordinating the operation from a suite at the downtown Marriott. Romano's people are moving into position around the park, Morrison reported, listening to updates through his earpiece while I tried to eat a sandwich that tasted like cardboard and felt like it was expanding in my throat. 6 men, probably armed, setting up what they think are discreet observation points around the pavilion and the main walking paths. They have no idea we've been watching them since Romano's plane landed at Hopkins Airport yesterday. The knowledge that I would soon be surrounded by armed criminals who'd killed 12 people was terrifying. But it was also oddly comforting to know that federal agents would be surrounding them while they surrounded me. "Hey, Linda," Morrison said, interrupting my dark thoughts about all the ways this could go wrong. "I need you to remember that this isn't about the money anymore. Your lottery ticket is just the bait that's going to help us destroy a network that's been murdering innocent people for 8 years. Every minute you spend in that park, every word you say to Jake Murphy, brings us closer to shutting down an organization that's caused unimaginable pain to dozens of families." The reminder helped me focus on something larger than my own fear. On the faces of Tom Brennan and Claire Williams and all the others who died because they'd trusted the wrong people with their good fortune. At 140E, I was positioned in the back seat of an unmarked van 3 blocks from Brookside Park, watching through tinted windows as Morrison's agents took their final positions throughout the area. Earl was somewhere in the park too, though Morrison wouldn't tell me exactly where. "Operational security," he explained, in case something went wrong and I was captured or forced to reveal information under duress. The thought of being captured by Vincent Romano's people was terrifying enough that I tried not to dwell on it, focusing instead on the memory of Tom Brennan's kind smile when he'd come into the diner every Tuesday, always ordering coffee and apple pie and asking about my family with genuine interest and concern. At 1:55 DAS, I walked into Brookside Park alone, carrying my purse with the lottery ticket inside, and wearing a wire so sophisticated I couldn't even feel its presence against my skin. The October afternoon was crisp and clear despite the morning's drizzle, perfect weather for families enjoying the weekend, and I saw parents pushing children on swings, joggers following the path around the lake, elderly couples feeding ducks from park benches, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that they were about to witness the culmination of a 2-year federal investigation. Jake Murphy was already at the pavilion when I arrived, sitting on a bench with a coffee cup in his hands and an expression of concerned relief on his face that would have fooled anyone who didn't know he was planning to kill the person he was waiting for. He stood when he saw me approaching, and his smile was so warm and genuine that for a moment I almost forgot he was a murderer who'd orchestrated Tom Brennan's death and was now planning mine. "Linda," he said, opening his arms for a hug that I forced myself to accept despite every instinct screaming at me to run as far and fast as I could. "You look exhausted. I've been so worried about you since you disappeared." The hug felt like embracing a predator that was pretending to be harmless. But I managed to relax into it and play the role of the grateful woman who'd finally found someone she could trust with her terrible burden. "Thank you so much for meeting me," I said as we sat down on the bench, positioning myself exactly where Morrison had instructed so that the surveillance teams would have clear sightlines and optimal audio reception. "I've been going crazy trying to figure out what to do." Jake's expression was the picture of sympathetic concern as I told him about my fears, about the stories I'd heard of lottery winners being robbed or worse, about feeling paralyzed by the magnitude of my good fortune and terrified of making mistakes that could cost me everything. He listened with the patience of a professional counselor, nodding at the right moments, making appropriate sounds of understanding and outrage at exactly the points where a genuinely helpful person would react. "You're absolutely right to be careful," he said when I finished my rehearsed litany of fears. "But Linda, you also can't let paranoia paralyze you forever. This money could change your life, help your daughter through her divorce, give you the security you've worked so hard for all these years. The key is handling it smartly, with people you can trust to guide you through the process safely." It was a masterful performance, and I found myself understanding exactly how Margaret Chen and Claire Williams and the others had been convinced to trust their killers. Jake Murphy didn't look like a criminal or sound like a threat. He looked and sounded exactly like what he claimed to be, a helpful friend who wanted nothing more than to see me safely enjoy my good fortune. "What would you suggest?" I asked, and I could see something shift almost imperceptibly in his expression. a predatory satisfaction that he tried to hide behind continued concern, but which I caught because Morrison had trained me to watch for exactly that kind of tell. "Well," Jake said carefully, "the first thing you need to understand is that claiming a prize this big isn't as simple as just walking into the lottery office and collecting a check. There are protocols, security measures, tax implications, financial planning considerations. It's actually pretty complicated, and if you handle it wrong, you could lose a significant portion of your winnings or put yourself at risk in ways you haven't even considered." His explanation of the complications involved in claiming my prize was sophisticated and compelling, full of technical details about federal tax requirements and state regulations that sounded authoritative enough to convince someone who didn't know better. But woven throughout his helpful advice were subtle suggestions about the dangers I might face from unscrupulous financial advisors, government bureaucrats who might leak information about my winnings, and criminals who specifically targeted lottery winners during the vulnerable period between winning and receiving their money. "I actually know some people who specialize in helping lottery winners navigate these challenges," he said, and there it was, the hook that had caught Tom Brennan and all the others. "They've been doing this for years, helping people claim their prizes without attracting the wrong kind of attention or falling victim to the scams that destroy so many winners. Would you be interested in meeting with them?" The moment felt suspended in time as I pretended to consider his offer, knowing that somewhere in the park, federal agents were recording every word and building the case that would finally bring down Vincent Romano's network. That sounds wonderful," I said, putting as much grateful relief into my voice as I could manage without overacting. "When could we arrange something like that?" Jake's smile broadened, and for just an instant, I saw something cold and calculating behind his helpful facade, the look of a predator who believed his prey was walking willingly into his trap. "Actually," he said, "they're in town today specifically to handle your situation. I could call them right now, see if they're available to meet with you this afternoon. No point in delaying when you're ready to move forward, right?" The speed with which he was trying to move me from this public place to a private meeting with his associates was exactly what Morrison had warned me to expect. But experiencing it firsthand was more chilling than any briefing could have prepared me for. "And today," I said, injecting just the right amount of nervous uncertainty into my voice. "I mean, that would be great, but I guess I'm still a little scared about meeting new people. Would it be possible to meet somewhere public, like we're doing now?" Jake's expression flickered with something that might have been impatience, but he recovered quickly with the practiced ease of someone who'd manipulated frightened people many times before. "Of course," he said smoothly, "though they might prefer somewhere a bit more private, for confidentiality reasons. They deal with a lot of sensitive financial information, and they're very careful about protecting their clients. Privacy." He was pushing harder now, and I could feel the wire against my skin recording every word as he tried to convince me to go somewhere isolated with people I'd never met, people who would almost certainly kill me once they had control of my lottery ticket and access to my financial accounts. "Actually," Jake continued, pulling out his phone with movements that seemed casual, but which I now recognized as carefully choreographed, "let me call them right now. I think you'll feel a lot better once you've had a chance to talk to them directly." As Jake dialed, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. A man in a jogging outfit who was running past the pavilion, but whose eyes were focused on our bench rather than the path ahead of him. One of Morrison's people, I realized, close enough to intervene if Jake tried to force me to leave with him. The knowledge that help was less than 50 feet away gave me the courage to continue the charade as Jake spoke quietly into his phone, explaining that he'd found the client they'd discussed, and that she was ready to meet with them immediately. When he hung up, his smile was triumphant in a way that made my skin crawl. "Great news," he said. "They're free right now, and they're very excited to meet with you. They have a private office downtown where we can discuss your situation in complete confidentiality and security." The invitation to get into a car with Jake Murphy and drive to a private office downtown was exactly the moment Morrison had warned me about, the moment when previous victims had made the fatal mistake of trusting their killers. "Actually," I said, standing up from the bench and taking a deliberate step backward. I think I need a little more time to think about this. Everything's happening so fast, and I want to make sure I'm making the right decisions. Jake's facade slipped slightly, and I saw frustration flash across his features before he brought his helpful expression back under control with visible effort. "Linda," he said, also standing and moving closer to me in a way that felt threatening despite his continued smile. "I understand you're nervous, but opportunities like this don't come along very often. These people are busy, important people with other clients to consider. If you're not ready to meet with them today, they might not be available again for weeks." The implied threat was clear enough that I felt my heart rate spike, but I forced myself to maintain the performance of a woman who was scared, but not yet suspicious of his motives. "I want to meet with them," I said quickly, "but maybe tomorrow. Could we set something up for tomorrow morning instead?" Jake's phone buzzed with what was obviously a text message, and when he read it, his expression darkened considerably in a way that suggested his patience and his instructions from Romano were both running out. "They'd really prefer to meet today," he said, and now there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before, a hardness that reminded me he was talking to someone he planned to kill. "In fact, they're insisting on it. They don't like having their time wasted, Linda, and they don't appreciate clients who can't make up their minds about accepting help." The mask was coming off now, the helpful neighbor being replaced by something much more dangerous, and I realized that Vincent Romano and his people were getting impatient with Jake's subtle approach and demanding that he deliver me to them immediately, regardless of whether I was comfortable with the arrangement. "Jake," I said, backing away another step and letting genuine fear creep into my voice, "you're scaring me. I thought you were trying to help me, but now you're acting like I don't have a choice in this." His expression shifted completely then, the last pretense of friendliness falling away to reveal the predator beneath. And I understood with crystal clarity why Tom Brennan and the others had died, because at some point in every interaction, the mask came off and victims realized they were dealing with killers, but by then it was always too late to escape. "You don't have a choice, Linda," Jake said quietly, reaching into his jacket with movements that were no longer casual or friendly. "You never did. The moment you bought that ticket, the moment you won that money, your choices were taken away from you." His hand emerged from his jacket, holding something small and black that I recognized as a taser rather than a gun. They wanted me alive and conscious, at least initially, which somehow made the threat even more terrifying. "Now we can do this easy, or we can do this hard," Jake continued, taking another step toward me with the confidence of someone who'd done this before and knew exactly how it would end. But either way, you're coming with me right now, and you're going to meet with my associates whether you want to or not." That's when Morrison's voice came through hidden speakers positioned around the pavilion, amplified loud enough for everyone in the immediate area to hear clearly and unmistakably, "Jake Murphy, this is the FBI. You are completely surrounded. Drop any weapons you're carrying immediately and put your hands where we can see them." The look of shock and rage that crossed Jake's face was deeply satisfying, but it lasted only a moment before he lunged toward me with the taser, clearly intending to take me hostage if he couldn't take me quietly to his associates. He never had a chance to reach me. The jogging agent tackled him before he'd taken 2 steps, and suddenly the peaceful park pavilion was filled with federal agents, all of them armed and shouting instructions for Jake to remain still and keep his hands visible while they secured the scene. I found myself standing in the middle of controlled chaos, watching as the man who'd been planning to kill me was handcuffed and read his rights while agents throughout the park arrested his associates and the members of Vincent Romano's team who'd been watching from what they'd thought were hidden positions. Morrison appeared at my side, his expression relieved and proud as he guided me away from the pavilion toward a waiting car. "You did perfectly," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration for what I'd just accomplished. "We got everything we needed. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt to coerce you into going with them. Jake Murphy and Vincent Romano are both going to prison for a very long time, and their entire network is going to be dismantled because you were brave enough to help us expose them." The aftermath of Jake Murphy's arrest unfolded with the swift efficiency of a federal operation that had been planned down to the smallest detail. But for me, sitting in the back seat of Morrison's car as we drove away from Brookside Park, it felt surreal and anticlimactic after the intense fear and adrenaline of the past few days. Through the rear window, I could see agents processing the scene, photographing evidence, and loading Jake Murphy into an unmarked van while park visitors stood at a safe distance, trying to understand what had just happened in their peaceful neighborhood space. Vincent Romano was arrested at his hotel 37 minutes ago, Morrison reported, listening to updates through his earpiece as we headed back toward the safe house. Along with 6 associates, including the enforcement specialists who were positioned around the park. We also executed simultaneous raids in Chicago, Phoenix, Portland, and Nashville, arresting 14 more members of the network and seizing financial records that document 8 years of systematic fraud and murder. The scope of the operation was staggering, and I realized that my willingness to serve as bait had triggered a coordinated takedown that spanned multiple states and would likely prevent countless future victims from suffering the same fate as Tom Brennan and the others. "What happens now?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be more complicated than I wanted it to be. Morrison's expression grew more serious as he considered how to explain the next phase of what had become the most important case of my life. "Now we build the prosecution case that will put these people away forever," he said. "Your testimony will be crucial, Linda, but so will the evidence we've gathered over 2 years of surveillance and the financial records we seized today." The mention of testimony made my stomach clench with anxiety, because it meant this ordeal wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase that would require me to face Jake Murphy and Vincent Romano in court, to relive the terror of the past few days in front of judges and juries, while defense attorneys tried to discredit my account of what had happened. "Will I be safe during the trial?" I asked, thinking about the enforcement specialists Morrison had mentioned, and wondering how many other members of Romano's network might still be free and looking for revenge against the woman who'd helped destroy their operation. "Absolutely," Morrison said with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd handled similar situations many times before. "You'll remain in federal protection until all trials are concluded and all appeals are exhausted. We're talking about a new identity, relocation to wherever you want to live, and enough security support to ensure you can claim your lottery winnings and enjoy them without fear." The promise of safety was reassuring, but it also reminded me that my old life in Cleveland was over forever. I would never again be Linda Hartwell, waitress at Henderson's Diner, neighbor to Earl Thompson, regular customer at Murphy's Corner Store. That woman had died the moment Earl knocked on my door at 3 a.m, and whoever I became next would be someone entirely new, someone shaped by the experience of helping to bring down a criminal network that had terrorized innocent people for years. What about Earl?" I asked, because despite learning that he'd been lying to me for 2 years about his identity and purpose, he was still the person who'd saved my life by warning me about the danger I was in. Morrison's smile was the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him since this whole nightmare began. "Earl's fine," he said. His cover held perfectly throughout the operation, and Jake Murphy never suspected that his helpful neighbor was actually a federal asset. "Earl will be able to maintain his residence in the neighborhood for as long as he wants, though I suspect he'll choose to retire from undercover work after this case. The idea that Earl might continue living next door to my empty house, maintaining the fiction of being a retired postal worker while I started a new life somewhere else, was both comforting and deeply sad. "Can I see him before I leave Cleveland?" Morrison nodded. "We're arranging a debriefing session tomorrow morning where you'll have a chance to talk with Earl and the other agents who worked on this case. It's important for operational closure, and I think it will help you process what you've been through." As we pulled into the garage of the safe house, I found myself thinking about Emily, and how I would explain to my daughter that her mother had become a federal witness who could never return to her old life, that the lottery winnings she'd been counting on to help her through her divorce would come with the price of never seeing her childhood home or her mother's friends again. The money was still there, $812 million that would change both our lives forever. But it would come wrapped in a story that sounded like something from a movie, rather than the ordinary life of a Cleveland waitress who'd just wanted to pay her bills and help her family. The debriefing session the next morning took place in a conference room at the Federal Building downtown, a sterile space with fluorescent lighting and government-issued furniture that somehow made the extraordinary events of the past week feel more real and official than they had in the comfortable domesticity of the safe house. Earl was there when I arrived, looking exactly like the neighbor I'd known for 15 years, except for something different in his eyes, a professional satisfaction that spoke of a job well done and justice finally served after years of patient work. "Linda," he said, standing to embrace me with the same warmth he'd always shown. "I'm so proud of what you did. I know it was terrifying, and I know it cost you more than anyone should have to pay, but you saved lives yesterday. You prevented Romano's network from killing more innocent people, and you gave families like Tom Brennan's the closure they've been waiting for." His words carried a weight of genuine emotion that reminded me why I'd trusted him despite learning about his deception. Underneath the federal agent was still the man who'd cared enough about my welfare to risk his own safety, warning me about the danger I was in. Morrison joined us at the conference table with a thick folder of documents and an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal concern for my well-being. "The evidence we gathered during your operation has already led to additional arrests," he reported, "with 3 more associates in Detroit, 2 in Atlanta, and a financial coordinator in Miami who handled money laundering for the entire network. Conservative estimates suggest we've prevented at least 20 future murders and recovered over $60 million in stolen assets that can be returned to victims' families." The scope of what had been accomplished made me feel dizzy with a mixture of pride and overwhelming responsibility, because it meant that my decision to trust Earl and Morrison had consequences far beyond my own safety. It had literally saved the lives of people I would never meet. People who would go on living normal lives without ever knowing how close they'd come to being targeted by Romano's network. "What about the families of people who were already killed?" I asked, thinking about Tom Brennan's grandchildren and Claire Williams's students and all the other innocent people who'd been affected by these crimes. "Justice," Earl said simply. "For the first time in 8 years, they'll have justice. Romano and his associates are going to spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, and the families will finally have answers about what really happened to their loved ones." The word justice carried a weight that went beyond legal proceedings or prison sentences. It meant that Tom Brennan's death hadn't been meaningless, that Claire Williams's kindness and trust hadn't been completely betrayed, that the other victims would be remembered as people who deserved better, rather than just statistics in a criminal case. Morrison spent the next hour walking me through the timeline for trials and appeals, explaining the witness protection protocols that would govern my new life, and answering questions about everything from how I would claim my lottery winnings to where I might want to relocate once the legal proceedings were concluded. "The important thing to remember," he emphasized, "is that you're not just a witness in this case. You're a hero who chose to fight back against people who prey on innocent Americans. Your courage made it possible to dismantle a network that had been operating with impunity for years. Hero." The word felt strange and uncomfortable when applied to me, because I still felt like Linda Hartwell, the 52-year-old waitress who'd been terrified and confused and just trying to survive when Earl knocked on her door in the middle of the night. But as I sat in that conference room, surrounded by federal agents who treated me with respect and gratitude, I began to understand that maybe heroism wasn't about feeling brave or confident. Maybe it was about doing the right thing despite being scared, about choosing to help others even when it meant risking everything you cared about. "Where will you go?" Earl asked as the formal debriefing concluded, and we prepared to say goodbye. Possibly forever. I'd been thinking about that question for days, weighing options that ranged from small towns in Montana to coastal cities in California. Places where I could start fresh with a new identity and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. "Somewhere warm," I said finally. "Somewhere Emily can visit without anyone asking too many questions about why her mother moved so far away so suddenly." Earl smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the neighbor who'd helped me carry groceries and listened to me complain about my ex-husband over the back fence. "You'll like being rich," he said, "and it suits you better than struggling ever did." The comment made me laugh for the first time in days. because it reminded me that underneath all the federal investigations and criminal networks and life-threatening danger, I had actually won the lottery. I was actually going to be able to pay off my debts, help Emily, and live without financial worry for the first time in my adult life. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of a beach house in North Carolina, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean while Emily played with her 2-year-old daughter in the sand below. The lottery money had been claimed and invested. The trials had concluded with guilty verdicts for everyone involved, and Linda Hartwell had officially become Linda Morrison, a name I'd chosen to honor the federal agent who'd kept me alive long enough to see justice done. Emily had adjusted to her mother's sudden wealth and relocation with the resilience of someone who'd survived her own share of life's unexpected challenges, and she'd been surprisingly understanding when I'd finally been able to tell her the truth about why I'd disappeared from Cleveland and why we could never go back. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she'd said when I'd finished explaining about Earl and Morrison and the criminal network that had been targeting lottery winners. "You could have just run away and hidden, but instead you helped catch the people who killed that nice man from the diner." Tom Brennan. Even in my new life, with my new identity and my financial security, I thought about him often, about his kindness, his weekly visits to Henderson's diner, his grandchildren who would grow up knowing that their grandfather's death had been avenged by a neighbor who'd cared enough to risk everything for justice. The lottery ticket that had started this whole nightmare was framed on my living room wall now, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important prizes aren't money at all. Sometimes they're the chance to make sure the bad guys finally pay for what they've done, and the knowledge that your courage helped protect innocent people you'll never meet from dangers they'll never know they faced. As I watched Emily and my granddaughter build sandcastles in the morning light, I realized that Earl had been right about being rich suiting me. Not because of the money itself, but because financial security had given me the freedom to help others in ways I'd never been able to afford before. I'd established a foundation to assist families of crime victims, funded scholarships for students like Claire Williams's kindergartners, and quietly supported other lottery winners who found themselves in dangerous situations. The $812 million had become more than personal wealth. It had become a tool for continuing the fight against people who preyed on the innocent and vulnerable. And every morning when I woke up in my beautiful beach house, safe and surrounded by family, I remembered that this new life had been purchased, not just with lottery numbers, but with the courage to stand up to killers and the willingness to trust federal agents who'd asked me to risk everything for justice. It had been the most terrifying experience of my life, but it had also been the most important thing I'd ever done. And as I sipped my coffee and watched the sun climb higher over the ocean, I knew that Tom Brennan and Claire Williams and all the others would have approved of how their deaths had ultimately led to something good, something that would protect future lottery winners from ever having to face the choice between trusting killers and losing their lives. Justice, it turned out, was worth more than any amount of money. And sometimes the biggest jackpot of all was the chance to make sure the right people won in the end. If you've made it this far, leave a comment below telling me what you thought of this story. I read all the comments and I love to hear your opinions. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage now and click the subscribe button. That way you won't miss any of our incredible stories that come out every week. And look, there's another video already appearing on your screen with a story that will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next video.